Hello everyone and welcome to our CAH podcast. At CAH, our presidential team is incredibly important to our mission to support housing professionals to create a future in which everyone has a place to call home. As an inspirational figure for the sector, the CAH president often provides the challenge that we need to improve the sector. I'm absolutely delighted today that we're joined by Lara Oyedele, who's our new president. We're going to have what I hope will be a wide-ranging conversation where you'll get to find out a little bit more about our new president, her thoughts on the housing sector, and we'll look as well ahead to Lara's presidential campaign, which is something that we're all incredibly excited about. So Lara, hello, welcome.
Hi James, how are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. Yes, I think we're both a little bit worried that my dog might bark and the postman might put something through your letterbox or knock on your door, but hopefully we'll be free of interruptions and we can have a really good chat. So, President, tell us a little bit about you, who you are, how you came into this into the housing sector.
Wow, that is such a big question. Who am I? My name is Lara Oyedele. I am a resident of Bradford, West Yorkshire, a product of various parts of North London. And how do I start? I came into the housing sector unknowingly as a kid, because it turns out my parents grew up, we were brought up in a council house. I didn't know it at the time. It was just home. It was just where we lived. But looking back, I realized we lived on a council estate, and everybody else around us were council tenants. So I started as a council tenant, and then I became a teenager. My parents moved, and I moved. We were a bit, how can I put it? Our relationship sort of grew apart. So I became independent of my parents when I was 16, and I left home, moved into a bedsit. And then my next sort of obvious connection with the social housing world was when my very horrible private landlord threw all my items onto the street when I went on holiday, came back from holiday and found out I was homeless. And I was homeless. So I was this homeless 19-year-old, had nowhere to go. And every day I used to go to what was called the HPU, the Homeless Persons Unit, and asked them for a flat. So I need a flat, please house me. I am tired of sleeping in the bus station, and I don't want to go to the hostel because the hostel is full of men, many of them who are either drinking or have other issues, drug problems. So I was the recipient of social housing. Eventually the council gave me a council flat on the top floor of a council estate, a council block on a council estate, which I loved to bit because it was my personal space. It was mine. I had keys to my front door. It was a brilliant experience to finally get a safe space that I knew that I could stay in as long as I wanted. And that enabled me to go back to do my A-levels and eventually go to university. So I was a council tenant as a kid. I was homeless and then got a council flat, went to uni. And then after my uni years, because initially I thought I was going to be a journalist and changed my mind, I decided I wanted to have a role in enabling people that were or are like I was a few years prior, as in homeless, enabled those people to have a safe and affordable home. So I wanted to do to others what housing professionals had done for me. So I specifically chose a career in housing. So unlike many, I directly, specifically, targetedly, is that even a word? Targetedly, a career in the sector. So I ended up going to the LSE, studied housing there with the likes of Anne Power and Mark McClellan and Christine Whitehead and et cetera, et cetera. And that was really, really good. Gave me a really good foundation in the history of the sector, the reason social, what should we call them, entrepreneurs, the Victorian philanthropists, set up many of what are now our very, very big housing associations, and started working at Nottingham Housing Trust as a tenant participation officer. So again, I do have that affinity with the tenants, because my first proper job was as a tenant participation officer for Nottingham Housing Trust. Then worked for Eve's Housing for Women, and that was an organisation that worked with single homeless women. So again, sort of being able to make that difference in the world that I used to be in. And then from Eve's Housing, I went on to Pinnacle. And again, that was a really interesting role because I got to work across the country. I worked in Edinburgh, I worked in Burnley, I think I worked in Wakefield, then Canning Town, Westminster. So the role at Pinnacle gave me a lot of exposure to different parts of the housing sector. Because I did block management, I did tenancy management, I did a whole bunch of stuff. It was brilliant. Learned a lot more about the sector. And then after that, I was fortunate enough to get the job as CEO of Oduduwa Housing Association. And, you know, that was another very interesting role where I was actually in a position to make a difference, make decisions that affected people's lives, try and do their repairs, keep people happy, do community stuff. That how can I say, that role didn't end the way I would have planned for it to end. But, you know, it is what it is. I fell out with the board. People are in positions of leadership for different reasons. That didn't work out, so I was asked to leave. And then what else happened? I was working freelance. I've been working freelance since then, training, motivating, working in the sector. I mean, it's a sector that I admire and I love so much because I think the work that we do is very, very important. We do very important things. Without a home, you cannot do all the other things in life that you think are important. Like I have an obsession with shoes, but when I was homeless, shoes were not on my list of things to think about. You might have, like, you have a dog, you might have a CD collection, a record collection, you might like fine wine, or you might like collecting cars or motorbikes or whatever it is you like doing. You know, it's difficult to sustain a relationship, it's difficult to study. So I think, you know, housing is fundamental to every other aspect of our life, and that's why I've stayed in the sector. I'm passionate about what we do. So even when I didn't have an official job title in the sector, I was still part of the sector. And nowadays I'm on the board of Housing 21. I chair a small homelessness charity in Bradford where I live, still trying to help those people that were like me all those many years ago. And I have a small buy-to-let portfolio, so I'm still trying to help people live. So my buy-to-let portfolio, the unique selling point is that my rents are always below the local housing allowance. So I have to wait to get the end of the auction stock. So I'm one of those buy-to-let landlords, but trying to do good. And I also run Black on Board, which is encouraging people, Black and brown people, to aspire to be in boardrooms. Is that enough?
I mean, it feels like you've managed to fit in about 5 careers into the time that it would take most of us to have one. I mean, that's absolutely fascinating history, and the way you've woven in your own personal story with your career in housing. I think is startling, really, and incredibly inspiring. I've got loads of questions off the back of that. I suppose one of them is just one of the themes that I think I've picked up throughout that history that you've given us is that theme around homelessness, and I suppose as someone who's experienced homelessness, how did that shape you and your career, and what did that give you then in terms of the way that you were able to work with people who were experiencing or are experiencing homelessness?
Okay. Now, from my experience, when you're in the middle of something, I guess you don't really see it as a thing. It's what when you're in the middle of the storm, you're just dealing with that at the time. So obviously, when I was homeless, I wasn't thinking I'll be able to tell a story about this in 10 years' time and weave it into a career. It was like, I'm homeless and I need a house. Please help me. I can't bear sleeping in cold, dank places anymore. But what that experience has done is, like I said initially, it's given me a very sort of emotional and fundamental appreciation of having a safe, affordable home and not living in fear of what you're going to do the next night. Because when you're homeless, your number one priority every morning is, where am I going to stay tonight? You wake up in the morning and think, right, that's one night done. What happens tonight? And that's consistent. Every day, your priority is, where do I sleep tonight? And in my case, it was, how do I keep clean? How do I make sure that I don't smell? That was my biggest priority. Food was never really a problem, because there's always been a lot of provision in local areas for home. You can always find somewhere to get food. That's never really been a problem. It's like, how do you keep clean? How do you stay safe? And how do you stay dry? So when I got to the stage where I was like working with Eves, and I was working with other single homeless women, I mean, it's a bit obvious to say I could really empathize with their situation. So I could talk to them knowing, so having a real understanding of what they're going through and what issues and concerns that are important to them. However, I must say that when I worked with Eve's Housing for Women, the women that I was working with had all been through very traumatic experiences. So, I mean, I count myself lucky. I was just homeless. I know it sounds funny to say that. I was just homeless. It wasn't as a result of any traumatic experience. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't raped. I wasn't thrown out of a window for being gay. None of those things happened to me. I just happened to not have a roof over my head. Whereas the ladies I was working with at Eve's Housing for Women all had additional very traumatic stories to tell, and that used to really get to me. And like, we had lots of former Filipino maids who had been brought to this country to work, and then their employers had seized their passports and then just sort of thrown them out on the streets. So I was working with people like that, who had actually made me feel very grateful about my experience. Like, okay, I was just physically homeless, but I didn't have any of that additional emotional experience to go through. And I think throughout my career, like even when I've done general needs, I was a chief exec, I've always been able to look at the service that we're providing from that point of view, which is, if I was a tenant, would I be happy with that decision, that the color, the size, the whatever, how would that make you feel if I was on the receiving end? So I've always had that passion of thinking of things from the resident's point of view, from the recipient's point of view, because I have been that person so many times. I don't know if that's answered your question, James.
No, I mean, yes, it has. It absolutely. And I suppose I'm just reflecting on it's really struck a chord with me, actually, that for the very fact that you are homeless, I would say, is traumatic enough. And then it's really made me think then about you then layer on some of the personal trauma that people have faced in addition to being homeless. And it really brought home to me just the complexity of it, and just how challenging it is for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at Eves, we were working with women who'd been trafficked as well, sexually trafficked, and people who'd had their children taken off with them. And you think there's layers of deprivation, layers of disadvantage, and I'm thinking, I was only like a little homeless. I wasn't that bad my homelessness experience was not that traumatic. I don't think it was traumatic. I was young at the time as well, so I guess you're more resilient when you're younger. I just think, well, it's a thing, it'll sort itself out, move on to the next thing. Yeah. And I know for certain that's why, when I did have the opportunity, now I'm a bit more flexible with my time, but I specifically reached out to Hope Housing in Bradford once I moved here to say, I want to be on your board. I want to help you in any way I can. I mean, initially I was donating bedding. I remember when I first moved, I donated a lot of bedding to the organisation, and then I said, if you let me know if you're looking for board members, and I'll become a trustee. Because what Hope Housing does is what I would have benefited from those many years ago, which is we go looking the kind of places where homeless people hide at night, and we try to find them somewhere to stay. So we have hosts that have spare rooms, we have some emergency accommodation, and we have some arrangements with, I think, people like shelter and crisis. So we have emergency bed spaces that we can put people in.
Right, thank you. And a lot of what you've talked about there, again, has really brought home to me the importance of a really person-centered service. You know, whatever aspect of housing we're working in, whether it's homelessness, whether it's housing association or local authority allocations, or a housing officer, that fundamental importance of seeing people as people, and having a person-centered approach to the services that we deliver. So maybe putting you on the spot a little bit, but where do you think the sector is then at the moment in terms of that person-centered approach? We read a lot about quality in the social housing sector, quality of stock, and also quality of service, and it's very clear that whilst there's a lot of fantastic stuff that goes on in the sector, there are also occasions where we don't get things right. So what's your view on that, and on how person focused we are as a sector?
Interesting question. This is where I'm going to get into trouble. So from my observations, it seems like the sector, I'm calling it the social housing sector. So that's a combination of housing associations, local authorities, ALMOs, co-ops, etc., etc. So people like the Abbeyfield Society, the almshouses. So that's the sector that I'm talking about. And I feel like we're almost splitting into two. And on one side, I feel we have mostly the smaller, medium size organizations, the ones that have a geographical limit to how, they're geographically based in specific areas, who I think by just because they are smaller, generally speaking, are able to have more contact with the residents and clients, and are able to sort of implement that. What do the tenants want from us on a day-to-day basis? And the priority is not necessarily how many thousand homes we build, and that's not the focus. You could call me a bit sort of, what's the word? I think there's a word that's coming to me. What's that word when the people think you're nice? It'll come to me, And then on the other hand, I feel that there are a group of housing associations who've just got so big, focusing on how many new units we can build, how much money we've got. I mean, we all have to have money in the bank to work. I get it. Yeah. I can't believe I just said that. I sound like quasi Quartek. I understand that, we have to run our organizations efficiently. We have to have money in the bank. We have to develop new homes. I totally appreciate that. But I was talking at a conference yesterday, and I was saying, I think one of the problems is if you've got 100,000 homes and you're in the boardroom and you're saying, well, 95% of our properties are in perfect condition. So the question is that 10, the 5% that aren't, which looks insignificant when you're looking at a board report. I believe that's a lot of homes. I'm not good at stats, but is that over 100 properties? I don't know how many properties you've got. That's a lot of properties. Yeah. So you've got 100,000 properties, and you say 5% of them are riddled with damp. Tenants aren't happy. They've got cockroaches. They're on ITN news. Quajos keep showing your videos online, and you're thinking, well, as a board member, you're looking at the board reports, go, well, that's not bad. 95% is brilliant. But if you're one of those 5%, you're not happy with where you're living. And I've worked in big organizations and small organizations, and I know how easy it is for things to sort of fall down the side of the cabinet, so to speak, or get lost in between departments. When I ran a housing association of 300 properties, I knew literally every issue that was going on. I knew most of the tenants, not all, because you don't need to know all the tenants. You just need to know the ones that have issues, mostly. So I knew everything that was going on. When I worked in a really large organization, I maybe knew 5% of what the issues were, because there's so many other things going on. And and I understand about economies of scale, and we're able to borrow money more if the bigger we are, the more money we're able to borrow, and all those kind of things. But it does seem that a very small percentage of our tenants fall through that gap, may not see housing officers daily, have no access to the board and things like that. And then the perception of the service and the actuality of the service is diminished because of that. Now, that's not to say that some of the smaller housing associations don't get it wrong either. I'm sure they do, but then it's a lot less effort for them to recoup and make things better. And if you're a large entity, then it's slightly more difficult to turn things around and change the culture and actually find out who the residents are. And I know a few that I follow on LinkedIn. These are tenants who are complaining about issues, and sometimes they're seen as litigious, perpetual complainant. And I personally believe that at the core of every complaint, there is a real issue there. Most people do not complain just for the sake of it. And even if we think they do, if you actually sit down and speak to them, you'll find out there's a reason. They might be upset about something else. It might not be the thing that they're complaining about, but something has gone wrong somewhere. Otherwise, they'd be minding their own business and focusing on their day-to-day life. They wouldn't just spend hours emailing and phoning and complaining. So I'm not sure. I hope I've not upset nobody there. I'm not saying big is bad, but I just think small is better, because you can focus on your residents and you can't deal. I mean, I imagine the logistics of 100 cans of tomatoes is probably identical to how you would deal with 1 million cans of tomatoes, but that doesn't work with human beings. And the more human beings you have that you're responsible for, the more flexibility you need, because everybody's going to have a slightly different need, slightly different issues, slightly different resolution, and trying to have a systematic response to everything doesn't work. And the larger you get, the more systematic you get. Whereas if you're small, you can be flexible. So there you go.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. And I'm almost certain that the big small debate is something that we'll revisit in future podcasts. So no, it's fantastic to get your thoughts and your views on that. So I want to look ahead a little bit now to your presidential campaign, the aims of your presidency, and I wondered whether you could just talk a little bit about that, just outline for us the reasons why, first of all, you wanted to run as president, to be president, and then flowing from that, what your campaign is going to focus on.
Okay. So I'll start with the reason I wanted to run for president, to say at the time there wasn't a reason. It was a challenge. It was a personal challenge to myself. So I have this habit of trying things out and just challenging myself to do something that I wouldn't normally do. And so applying for CIH president was one of those things. I thought, oh, that looks interesting. I'll give that a go. It's literally, I'll give that a go. Never in a million years thinking that I'd win it. So I actually wasn't expecting to win. So I went into it with a completely different headspace, which was, I'm going to have a bit of fun. I'll talk about housing to loads of people. I'm not going to get any anyway, so I'll do it and then go back and mind my business. So and that backfired because people voted for me, and I was like, oh, okay. Oh, right, thank you very much. So now that I seriously wasn't expecting to win, but I thought I'll throw my hat in the ring and give it a go. And I do lots of motivational speaking, and I often say to people, if you don't put yourself forward, you'll never be picked. Yeah. Okay. So when was it Joe that called me to tell me that I'd won? Initially, I thought it was a joke. I thought this is just a wind up. You know, there's a TV camera in my house watching it. I never really thought I'd won, and I thought, oh my god. Then I think I screamed for about 20 minutes. I was like, ah! And then I said, all right, now what do I do? I've got to do something. So luckily, I think what I really like about the process of being vice president before you become president is that you have a decent amount of time to give yourself space to think about, well, what actually do you want to do? Now, because I never expected to win, I never really had an idea of a campaign, even though if you go back and look at my what's that thing you write when you're running for election?
Yeah, like a manifesto.
Yeah, if you look at my manifesto, I wanted to resolve all the world's evils. There's a long list of things that I wanted to change. I want to change everything. Obviously, it's only a year long. So I spent the year thinking about, what's my experience in the sector, what's important, what's important, what's passionate about, what am I passionate about,
Yeah.
but more importantly, what's different. And I thought, well, what's different? What are people not speaking about? What needs to be brought up to the top of the agenda that is at the bottom? And then it just occurred to me one day, I thought, well, I do Black on Board, I sit in boardrooms. That is an issue that's not spoken about. The diversity in boardrooms is, I'm not sure there's a lot of conversation about that within the housing sector. I know that Inside Housing do their 2-yearly review of diversity in the sector. And I thought, well, that reflects my experience. I am in the boardroom. I am a minority in my boardrooms. And I thought, yeah, I'll do the campaign about that. And one of the other reasons I wanted to do that as a campaign is, on the back of that, try to be a role model or a motivational figure for the younger people in the sector to think, well, actually, if Lara can do it, even though she didn't plan to do it, then they can do it. Because I would like to have more non-traditional kind candidates standing for vice presidency, because any member of CIH can stand for vice president. And I think most members that were like me thought you had to either be a CEO or run a large organization. You had to be someone of certain caliber, standing, kudos or whatever it is. And because I never thought I could, and I did, so I'm still shocked that I am. So I want people to know that, if you're a CIH member, you could consider running for president. You don't have to have been here for like 500 years like most of us have been. You can run for president. And also, if I was that young, that little Black teenage girl that was homeless, and X number of years later, I'm president of a professional body, I want to be able to tell that story, to say, well, if I can do that, so can you. Because I came off a council estate. My mum's a nurse. My dad works in a warehouse. We had no perception, no idea that I could be president of anything, And I'm thinking, if I can do that, so can you. And I know there's lots of individual sort of people in the sector, younger people who are maybe having a bit of a hard time in their workplace, feel overlooked, feel underappreciated. And I want to say, listen, I've been there. If I can come back and do what I'm doing now, so can you. So that's that. So that's the sort of part of the emotion behind my campaign. And also because I love shoes, so I tried to find a way to do shoes, homelessness, and diversity in the boardroom. And being Lara, I managed to come up with a connection between all three, which is about walking in my shoes. So it's not just about shoes, but in terms of reflecting my experiences within the sector as a homeless person, as someone who's now in a boardroom, and someone who likes shoes. And the other thing I wanted to do with my campaign is I wanted the participation in the presidential campaign to be participatory, a bit more equitable. And coincidentally, I didn't plan this, but at the time, the economy wasn't as bad as it was and people had more money in their pocket. But I wanted it to be a campaign where everyone could partake, whether or not they had cash in their pocket. And it turns out that it was so timely. So what I'm looking for is everyone to be part of the campaign in terms of donating shoes, which means literally everyone can donate something. You don't have to part with your hard-earned cash, because if you're like me, you're probably trying to work out to pay your electricity bill. So I want everyone to feel that they can be part of the campaign and donate shoes.
Thank you very much. That's it's a quite a broad-ranging campaign focusing on a number of different areas that speak to I guess to your housing story. How people of colour are able to thrive in our sector, and then that clear link to homelessness. So what are your views then on what the sector gets right and gets wrong? as far as race is concerned then? So you've spoken about the boardroom, and I'm assuming what you mean there is that we don't have enough representation from Black and ethnic minority communities on our boards. So you just reflect a little bit on what you think the sector needs to do there, and perhaps what you think it does well as well.
What the sector does well, the sector is able to attract a very diverse entry-level staff team. So if you go to any housing organisation, be it local authority, housing association, ALMO, co-op, you're going to find that at the entry level, the lower level, sort of the operational level, it's very diverse. Generally speaking, there may be one or two that aren't, but generally speaking, it's not a sector that is lacking in diversity in terms of ethnicity in the staff teams. Where things seem to have gone wrong or haven't gone as well as they could have, and this is not unique to housing, because I speak to my colleagues, a lot of my friends work in other sectors, and they say it's not unique. I've got friends who are lawyers, got friends who are architects, and I've got lots of friends who work for London Underground, funny enough, and it's not unique. Housing is not unique in this respect, but I would like to think that housing could be a leader in trying to make things better. So I was going to say that what then happens is, as you get to the more senior levels, the diversity that is evident at the front line seems to vanish, and you get one or two people, and obviously you get the exec team, and then you get into the boardroom, and in some cases you get to the boardroom and there are some housing boards that are still all white, predominantly white men. I have nothing against white men. I love many of them, most of them. However, I feel that the boardroom sets the tone and the culture for the organisation, and if the boardroom doesn't represent either the tenants or the residents or the communities they're based in, then I think a lot of the decisions that are being made will not be effective and will not represent the needs and the desires of the customers and the staff and the communities. So on that basis, I am shocked when I look at some of the boardrooms of London-based organisations and see how white they are. I mean, there's no reason why any London-based housing association should not have a diverse board. Now, what frustrates me and why I've chosen to pick this challenging topic for my campaign is that I know that there are many qualified, experienced Black and brown people in the sector who know their stuff, that may have now left the sector to go work freelance or set up their own consultancies because of the glass ceiling or the concrete ceiling. The explanation that was given to me 30 years ago is no longer valid. I was told then there aren't enough people like you who are qualified to be in the boardroom. You know, we don't have the experience, you don't have the qualifications. I now know that is not the case because I know many of these people. Now, one of the other things the sector does get right is that there are many opportunities for people to be mentored, coached. There's a lot of coaching programs, lots of mentoring programs, which are fine. They're great for the individual, but only so far. If you have all these programs and people complete these programs and then go and sit back down to the space that they were before, and there's no opportunities to progress, no opportunities to go to the higher level, to get into the boardroom, to get to the exec team, then I think sometimes strategically it's a waste of time. It's beneficial to that individual, but in terms of your organizational succession planning, it's a waste of time, because what inevitably happens is people will leave. You know, you've motivated them, you've shown them how brilliant they are, they know they can do better, and if you don't open the doors internally, they will go to other organizations. So what we have done as a sector is we've trained up a lot of really good people who've gone to work elsewhere.
Thinking about that, and when you talked about your presidency, you talked about all the things you wanted to do and how actually you've only got a year. So thinking about that, what would a successful presidential year look like for you?
That is a question I've been thinking about for ages, because it's not, let's see. So let me think. The first the first success measure would be how many pairs of shoes we can get to Shoe Aid. We've not given ourselves a target yet, but I think that might be useful to have a target. But as I'm not competing with anyone else, because no one else has ever collected X number of shoes, so whatever we achieve will be brilliant. So I think, you know, so on that, in terms of shoes, I think the knowledge, the exposure and understanding of Shoe Aid as a charity, and actually shoe poverty as an issue for homeless people, I think will be a big achievement. And the reason I like that is that I'm hoping the impact of that will outlive my presidency, that even after I'm no longer president and the fabulous Jill takes over, people will still continue to send and donate shoes to Shoe Aid. So for me, I think my presidency will be successful post my presidency, if that makes sense. So that's the shoes part.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the shoes part of it. Now, in terms of changing the ethnic dynamics in boardrooms, now I know that I'm not going to achieve that in a year. It's not possible. You're looking at maybe probably 3 to 6, 10 years before, if anything I do now is successful, that's when that's the time that you will see the impact, because we know, you know, the turnover of boardrooms is about 3 to 6 years. So what I'm hoping to do is initiate a campaign that outlives the presidency, where people are able to ask their boards, why are you still not diverse? So we're still looking for a hashtag, in addition to In My Shoes, that is more focused on why is your board not diverse? I mean, that's a long hashtag, so we're thinking something smaller and shorter, something like representation. Yes, maybe representation matters, or boards.
Yeah.
I don't know whether boards need to be diverse. That, again, that's too long. So it's along the lines of Charity So White. Are you aware of the Charity So White campaign?
No, go on, tell me a little bit more about that.
Anyway, but just the name alone,
yeah,
you can figure out what it's about. So it's Charity So. It's hashtag Charity So White.
Okay, yeah.
And that's a campaign that started in the charity sector during Black Lives Matter in 2020. And the question was, why is it a bit like housing? There's so many diverse staff at the front line of the charity sector, and majority of the leaders, the CEOs and the boardrooms generally are not so diverse. And their hashtag was Charity So White. And that hashtag is still being used now, and it's still being used to question organizations.
Yeah.
And I want something like that, so even when I'm not here anymore as the president, people can still refer to that, to ask that question, and you don't have to explain what it means. It's self-evident. So if you've got any idea, James, please share. And then the other thing that I wanted to do that would outlive my presidency is, obviously there's the bit on the CIH website that has all the good practice. Because one of the good things about this campaign is we don't need to do any research. There's lots and lots and lots of research already done about the lack of diversity in boardrooms and the impact that has. And I think it was the McGregor-Smith review that actually put money, a financial value to that lack of diversity in boardrooms. So we don't actually need to do any research. So what we're working on the site is to put all the research and the good practice in one place so that we can point people to that. And there's a lot of really good work that's happened in Wales. Wales are ahead of the curve. They've already got lots of housing associations sign up to diversifying their boards. It's like they knew I was coming in Wales. And then England is still a bit behind, and I think Scotland's still further behind. And I've not done my research on Ireland yet. But so I'm hoping that would be useful post my presidency. But I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to set up that will outlive me is what we're currently calling the Steve Douglas Award, which this is the first time you're hearing this, everyone. So the Steve Douglas Award, the plan I have is that it will be co-owned by about 6 or 7 of the major housing bodies, so that it's the only one that there is. And the idea of the Steve Douglas Award is that it is awarded once a year to the boardroom that has done the most in that year to diversify itself. Now, obviously, I haven't worked out how that would be measured or decided, but hopefully that's not for me to work out. So what I'm saying, James, if I've got the CIH, NHF, BME National, Unify, HQN, and there's 3 other people whose names I can't remember now together. And the idea is one person from each of those organizations is on the judging panel, and they decide who it goes to every year. And again, hopefully that will live on for many years, in the honour of Steve Douglas, who did so much for the sector and who's one person who definitely knows what it's like to be a minority in the room. He was always a minority, because, you know, we talk about shortage of diversity in terms of ethnicity in the boardroom. And if you look at the sector, I don't know if you've noticed it, James, but there's a lot more black women than there are black men. So Steve was always a minority. He understood what it was like to be the minority in the room, and he was also very passionate about pushing people forward, paving the path for others to come behind him. And I think it's important that he has a legacy because he did so much for the sector. So I'm trying to combine, my awe of Steve Douglas with something that lives beyond me. And so it's a Steve Douglas Award. Hopefully that'll be my success.
Yes, absolutely. So I mean, that was fantastic to hear. Really ambitious campaign across a range of issues. And I think what has really struck a chord with me is the passion and the enthusiasm and the drive that you have, which I'm sure is going to make this a very exciting, very entertaining, and ultimately a very productive presidential year. So Lara, thank you so much for sharing your story and your thoughts with us today. I could literally have spoken to you for about the next couple of hours, really. But we need to keep things short for the listeners. If people want to find out more about Lara's campaign, it's on our website, which is www.cih.org/in my shoes. So do take the opportunity to have a look, and I'm sure you'll be seeing and hearing plenty from Lara over the course of the presidential year. So Lara, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, James. It was lovely chatting with you. Take care.